Welcome to the Retailer Series. We are today in the heart of New York City, about to meet with Cellini founder Leon Adams, who's going to tell us everything about this company that started in 1977. So tag along. Hi everyone, I am very excited to continue this Retailer Series. I'm here in the heart of New York City with Leon Adam, who is probably the mastermind behind Cellini, a company that you started in 1977.
Correct.
How did that start? How did you come up with the name? I want to know everything about how did you become you?
So let's see, well, back in 1977, I was 21 years old, right out of college. And my father had an antique gallery in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and was offered a store across the hall from him, which was a very small 800 square foot old Cartier boutique, in fact. And my dad came to me and asked me if I would be interested in going into the jewelry business. And I said to him, I knew nothing about jewelry straight out of college. And he said, well, if you can sell anything. And you've worked with me during the summers and you know how to sell, so I think we should try the jewelry business together.
It runs in your blood.
So the store started construction, and I was overseeing the construction of the store. And one day this woman walks into the store. At the time, she must have been 74, 75 years old. Her name was Audemars Piguet, who used to work at Mauboussin Paris, and she had just retired as the head of Tiffany's diamond office here in New York City. And she came to us and was looking for a job. And being she worked a block away, the part-time position was perfect for her. And we hired her immediately, even though the store wasn't even completed then. And she basically taught me the jewelry aspect of the business. She taught me about diamonds, colored stones. She had introduced me to the biggest emerald dealers here in New York, the colored diamond dealers here in New York, the white diamond dealers. Really, she was my eyes in the beginning because I didn't know what I was looking at or buying. I just bought my taste or what I liked, but she was really my eyes to jewelry and taught me the business. I then, of course, went to GIA to get a gemologist degree, but in the beginning... To
make sure you knew what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. But she was really my eyes. So the store opened in 1977 with the help of Mrs. François, and we brought in, at that time, we carried 3 watch brands, which were Audemars Piguet, Omega, and Corum. And these brands were very different in price, very different in nature. And again, those days, Audemars Piguet and Omega was distributed by the Norman M. Morris Corporation. And we had an in over there. We knew somebody over there, and that's how we brought in those 2 brands. And Corum, just because it was a very fashion-forward brand in those days with stone-colored dials and Rolls-Royce strap watches and just different gimmicky items. So we thought it would be an interesting line to start with. And those are the 3 brands that we started with. Naturally, over the years, being a guy, I kind of gravitated to watches a little more than the jewelry aspect. And it was an interesting time because it was really at the advent or the focus was on quartz timepieces in those days. Audemars Piguet had come out with the Royal Oak, which we were doing very, very well with. But there was some resistance because it was automatic, and then Audemars Piguet introduced a quartz version of the Royal Oak. I don't know if you recall that model, but it was a
Those are the one you can find now easily on the market, the quartz ones.
They're probably very rare today. I haven't seen them, but it's possible.
Yeah, you can find some.
Yeah?
Especially smaller diameters for women.
Okay.
The 34, yeah, you can find them.
But they had come out with a rectangular Royal Oak. I don't know if you remember that.
I've seen one in auctions, I think.
And that was really the piece I was referring to. Yes, the woman's smaller Royal Oaks came out in quartz watches. But we kind of kept our focus on the automatic timepieces and the manual timepieces. It was a difficult time in the industry, no doubt about it. But it was also a time that things were evolving. We were seeing people from many parts of the world in those days. In the late 70s, early 80s, there was a very big influx of Middle Eastern clientele coming to the United States. We saw a bunch of tourism from Japan, which we had never seen before. Also, Mexico was a very, very big consumer in those days. And, you know, being in a hotel, we were dealing with transients from all over the world. And
it was putting you in the right place.
Correct.
And also you were kind of the best of the two worlds. Watches, jewelry, stones, quartz, mechanical, like you had the entire palette to offer to
We did,
clients.
but we were trying to find our way in those days because really, you know, the jewelry business is extremely large. And I was taught in the beginning, it doesn't matter how much inventory you have. You can have $1 billion worth of inventory in your store and you still won't have what somebody's looking for. The jewelry industry is truly a bottomless pit. You could fill a store up with gold chains and you could put in one corner, in one case, 10 times the amount of money in
because
diamonds.
of colored diamonds.
Correct.
And of course.
So we were finding our way, but the one thing that Armand François had taught us is that we can't be everything to everybody and we need to set our standards high. And in America, we decided in those days we would only carry 18 karat gold and or platinum. We never brought in 14 karat gold or anything else, whereas most of the American companies did sell 14 karat gold.
You know that up until, I'm making a break here, but until I think 2 or 3 years ago, 14 karat gold jewelry in Europe, at least in France, it wasn't considered as fine jewelry. It would be considered as like costume, versus America has been using 14 karat gold for decades.
But, you know, again, so I guess from her French background of Mauboussin and Tiffany and Cartier, which she worked at as well, it was only 18 karat. So that's how we set up the shop. And we managed to keep a very high level of quality within our diamonds. We never brought in anything below a G color stone. We were introduced to some very important stone dealers. In those days, there was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Avocado, who was one of the foremost authorities of colored diamonds in the world.
That's a name to remember.
It really was. Well, he was the one in 1964 who, in the Gem Pavilion at the New York World's Fair, those colored diamonds at that pavilion were his. So he was the one who would have the blues and the pinks and the yellows and the greens. And when I met him, he was already 81 years old. And he kind of took me under his wing. Again, his home was a block away from our shop. So he used to close his office at 4 o'clock and walk through the hotel, stop in and chat with me. And he would teach me about colored diamonds. And I'll never forget one day he called me and he said, "I want you to see something." And I ran over to his office and he opened a piece of paper. And in it was a carat 43 round, vivid pink diamond. But such a pink that, imagine a splatter of pink paint on a white canvas. That's how pink it was. And I had asked him what the price was. And in those days, the best pink diamond in the world was $50,000 per carat.
Wow.
And he said to me, "This stone is $75,000 a carat." And being young and naive, I said to him, "Well, Mr. Avocado, isn't that a lot of money?" He said, "Let me show you something." And he pulls out a newspaper article about a stamp. He said, "Look, this stamp is going at auction, and they're asking $1 million for this stamp. This stamp took 1 second to make because somebody put an airplane on it upside down." He said, "This diamond took over 1 million years to make." He said, "This stamp has to be kept between 2 pieces of glass because if you blow on it, it'll disintegrate." He said, "This diamond is going to be here for your children's children's children." He said, so if they can ask $1 million for this one-of-a-kind stamp, why can't I ask 75,000 a carat for this one-of-a-kind diamond? Make a long story short, he sold it the next day.
Well,
So-
diamonds are forever.
Yes, that absolutely forever.
But it's interesting how you've had some mentors within the jewelry side of things, from stones to, I mean, diamonds and jewelry. But you naturally progressed into watches, but who taught you about watches besides your own flair, gut, and passion that got you into it?
Really, nobody. It was just something that I gravitated to at a young age. I truly was fascinated by mechanical timepieces and cars and, anything mechanical. I think
boy being a boy.
Boys are boys, and we love our toys. And it was just a natural progression that as time went on and we became more sophisticated, we learned about other products and other brands and other companies. In those days, all the companies were basically independent. And I started going to Basel in 1979, I think was my first year in Basel, and blown away by Basel in those days, which was truly an experience. And we would go, I would travel with, in those days, my mother would come with me and my father, and we would travel to Basel. And
Field trip, family field trip.
Yeah, a family field trip, and we would walk the halls and look at interesting product. And from there, we made certain decisions. We brought in a brand, IWC, or we brought in a brand, Jaeger-LeCoultre. Although that wasn't the place to bring in the brands because they really didn't have time for you there if you weren't already established, but we got to see what was represented there. And it was just a natural evolution of things. Like as we outgrew certain brands, we replaced it with different product, if you will.
And so by then, we're like close to like the early 80s. After your first Basel, you had a couple of watch brands, you were carrying jewelry. How did then you end up becoming, and we'll talk to it in another episode about how Cellini store has become one of the ultimate address here in New York City and probably in America when it comes to the watch and jewelry selection. But how did you naturally transform and evolve into what you are today? Because now we're almost talking 35 years from
Correct.
that time on the chronological timeline.
I think it was out of necessity, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I think what happened was in the early 80s, there was an organization called Journe, which was really the store to go to if you wanted to find a timepiece. And Journe in the 80s had everything from Patek and Rolex on down, and they were the supermarket for watches. And it was very hard as an independent to compete with a company that large and that well-known. So what we did was, or what I did was, I said, I can't compete with them. Their advertising, their money that they could buy collections with, their expertise. So I decided that I was going to go and carry collections that A, they didn't carry, or B, if we did overlap, we tried not to carry the same items. So, for example, if there was a brand that we both carried mutually, we would concentrate on the higher end of the brand because A, we weren't getting the mass traffic that they were getting. We weren't selling volumes of product, we were selling fewer pieces. So we thought it'd be better to sell fewer high-end pieces than more low-end pieces because we couldn't compete.
Yeah, but you also had the genuine interest in telling the story and educating the people who would come by your store in order to sell them a complication, limited edition, a unique piece that a place like Journe wouldn't be necessarily equipped in the sales team to actually sell this type of products.
I don't think they weren't able to sell it. I just think that because of the nature of their business, of a high volume business, that they didn't specialize or want to delve into that super higher end because financially it wasn't as rewarding as selling 10 lower price pieces that were easy to sell. And I think from their standpoint, it made more sense to do the volume business, which they were doing, as opposed to relying on that one or two clients who were going to buy that high end. Being we couldn't compete at the lower end, we decided we'll compete at the higher end. And it was also a natural progression because somebody who wanted to purchase maybe an important diamond was the person capable of buying that expensive timepiece, and vice versa.
So we're looking at like the tip of the iceberg type of clientele where you would be able to nurture also a relationship and not just
for
a tourist
jewelry
kind of-
and for watches. And you know, we were trying to attract that client who was interested in the more important pieces of jewelry, whether it's gemstones or important pieces. And those were the clients that were obviously able to purchase some of these timepieces. So it kind of went hand in hand to have the two together. And as time went on, and we saw we were successful in that, we started branching out and bringing in other brands that had high-end timepieces in their collections. And some of the early brands that we brought in, of course, I told you was Audemars Piguet, one of the first, but we would carry everything from AP, from their minute repeaters to their grand complications, and so on and so forth. We brought in Francois Paul Journe early on, and Breitling we brought in very early on.
We're going to delve into this, but if you may tell, now being in 2024 and looking back at everything that has happened and how your stores have grown, the company has grown, was there ever like a turning point or like something that actually marked the evolution of why Cellini as a retailer is still one of the still standing important addresses, considering that a lot of retailers are closing doors every day in this industry?
I think a lot of it has to do with trust and honesty to your clients. People realize that you're in business to make money, and people don't begrudge you for making money. But people also wanted to be treated correctly. They want to be able to get a good value, and they want honest advice on their purchases. So, for example, in our jewelry business, when we sell a colored diamond to somebody, we'll always guarantee them that we will buy it back for the price they paid.
Okay.
So you buy a colored diamond from me 15 years ago and you want to sell it, I'll gladly buy it back for the price you paid back then, no problem. So, but this gives somebody confidence to make the purchase in the first place.
But for watches, it's slightly different though.
Watches are completely different. First of all, the whole watch business changed. People were buying watches back then because they needed a timepiece or they wanted something. Today, it's more of a statement of what you're wearing and the type of watches that, yes. And things have changed dramatically in the watch industry.
But you're still having fun.
Not as much fun as we used to have, but yes, still having fun. Having fun with all the independent brands. The group brands have become much more difficult to work with these days. They make some great products, but again, it's becoming very, very difficult to work with them.
And why Cellini?
So when the store was being conceived back in 1977, we were trying to think of a name to open a jewelry store here in New York City. And back then in 77, there was a influx. There was a few French jewelers coming into New York City, and we decided we wanted to go completely different, and we wanted an Italian name to stand out. And my mother first came up with the idea of Hampton Court Jewelers, which was the English, of course, the Hampton Court, and we said, no, that name is too long and it doesn't resonate with people. We need something short and concise and Italian. So one of the first things that came to our mind was the name Bellini. And Bellini was, of course, the drink, and it was quick, it was easy, it was signified Italian. And then we started going down the alphabet, and the next letter was C. So we said Cellini, and then we realized, of course, Cellini, the famous Benvenuto Cellini, the famous Italian Renaissance artist and goldsmith. We said, what a perfect name. It's purely Italian, it's a goldsmith, and it's jewelry, so that was it. It just clicked, and that was it. It was literally a 2-hour discussion amongst the family, and that was the name that was picked.
And nobody ever called you Leon Cellini? Because I've heard this at different fairs, not Leon Adams from Cellini, but Leon Cellini.
Yes, they do call me Leon Cellini, yes. There's no relation at all.
Well, thank you so much
My
for
pleasure.
this first in-depth, and we'll see you for another episode.
You got it. My pleasure.